Hello, Santa Barbara. Thank you, Dinah. The Bush-Cheney regime is like a deep, dark pit. The further down you penetrate, the uglier and more horrible it gets. Creatures of the dark, grotesque and malignant, leap out at you. When you think you've seen the worst, you find there are even more evil things beyond that. As bad as you thought that they were, when you read our book, Impeach the President, the case against Bush and Cheney, you will find that they are much, much worse. But what is and should be even more disturbing than this regime is that this country's political institutions and its mass media have been complicit in Bush and Cheney's crimes. Allow me to give you 3 examples of this. When the Military Commissions Act of 2006 was being considered by Congress in September, a bill that legalizes torture and strips anyone of habeas corpus rights if they are declared by the President as an unlawful enemy combatant. Did the Democrats stand up and condemn this act as inhumane, barbaric, and illegal? Did they point out that habeas corpus has been around for nearly 900 years and that stripping it meant they could hold someone indefinitely in a war that Dick Cheney has called a war that will last for generations? Did they say that habeas corpus was one of the explicit complaints of the American revolutionaries against the British, and that the absence of habeas corpus is the marker of a dictatorship? The Democrats had the votes to prevent closure, and they could have filibustered this bill. Instead, they just let it pass. And as John Kerry and Dianne Feinstein said when they were casting their no votes, what did they say? They complained that the GOP was probably going to use their no votes against Democrats in November. As if partisan rivalry was even the point. As if their precious jobs in the Senate was the issue. As if abrogating due process and legalizing torture were just another pork barrel bill. My second example is the John Warner Defense Authorizations Act of 2007. How many of you have heard of this act? Yeah, that's part of the problem, right? Bush signed this act in a private ceremony on the same day that he signed the Military Commissions Act of 2006. Why was it done so covertly? How come the vast majority of people here have never even heard of it? Because the Warren Act greases the tracks for martial law. It abrogates the Posse Comitatus Act, and it weakens the Insurrection Act. Posse Comitatus prohibits the use of military troops in domestic affairs in the United States. This Warner Act gives the President the power to take over the National Guard units over the objections of state governors to enforce a, quote, public emergency, unquote. In the act, Bush is supposed to confer with a select number of Congresspeople before declaring a public emergency, and he's supposed to disclose why he's doing it and what he's doing, again, to a select group of Congresspeople. Well, we all know how well that works. But in his signing statement, Bush declared that he would reserve the right not to even let in some Congresspeople in on what he's doing. What element of the corporate media has even talked about the Warner Act? Who among them have highlighted Bush's signing statement and what this means? Even after all that has come to light about this regime's crimes and malfeasances, massive, illegal surveillance of all Americans, Katrina, their utter and criminal failure to confront global warming, and so on and so on. The Democratic Party continues to insist that impeachment is what? Off the table. Which is my third example. How can this be? How can people seriously be arguing that war crimes, tyranny, and torture should be left alone and ignored? Who could possibly want to find common ground with fascists? Only those people who don't understand yet what is afoot, or are in denial, or who do understand what is afoot, but want in on the action could ask for common ground with fascists. The cold, hard truth is that the crimes of the Bush-Cheney regime are a shared crime of this system as a whole. Some people say wait until '08. This is what I say to that. Every day this regime remains in power is another day that more people are tortured at Abu Ghraib, in Guantanamo, in Afghanistan, at dozens of black sites throughout the world, and more people are murdered every single day. Every day that global warming is ignored puts this planet in greater peril. How can we wait till '08? This regime needs to go yesterday. They need to go back where they belong, a period they admire and want to emulate, the Dark Ages. Not only does action to force them from office need to occur now, but because of their terrible ongoing crimes, there is something even more important at stake here. Bush and Cheney are the cutting edge of a movement and a direction that this country's been moving in for some 3 decades. You'll have to read our book to get a full analysis. And by the way, we've got an incredible compendium of essays in here. The introduction is by Howard Zinn, Greg Palast, Mark Crispin Miller, Peter Phillips, 22 experts in their fields. But let me just cite one thing. The words of a liberal named Michael Ignatieff, who was the Harvard Carr Center for Human Rights Policy Director, to illustrate what I'm pointing to here. In 2003, he wrote an article for the New York Times Magazine, tellingly entitled, "The American Empire, Get Used to It." Get used to it? Ignatieff argues that coercive interrogations, i.e. torture, and preemptive invasions are okay because they prevent what he calls the greater evil, a second terrorist attack on the United States. What kind of moral arithmetic is this? 650,000 plus Iraqis dead to date and counting, nearly 3,000 American service personnel dead and counting, in a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. The U.S. is being refashioned in a way that torture is tolerated and widely practiced, and where constitutional guarantees for civil liberties and civil rights and international law are a thing of the past. What was unthinkable only a year or two ago is now an accomplished fact. The reason the Democratic Party leadership is shielding these fascists, and the reason even liberals like Ignatieff are cheerleaders and apologists for war crimes and torture, is because they are on board and in on the action. We're an empire, after all, they bleat. Barack Obama, who so many people now think may be an answer, for example, has said that military action against Iran may be justified. Get used to it, they're saying.
AIPAC!
Well, I have something to say about that. I will never get used to it. What would it take to change this virulent political atmosphere? It's going to take an extraordinary popular upheaval of the people of this country. If Bush and Cheney aren't massively repudiated by popular mass movement, the pictures from Abu Ghraib are the new America. The movement to impeach isn't just about holding these criminals accountable. It's about sharply reversing the overall direction that this country has been going in for the last 30 years. That's right. It's about repudiating everything that Bush and Cheney represent, because they're not an aberration. They're merely the most aggressive, most upfront, cutting-edge representatives of the new order. The American people, as broadly as possible, need to know not only what our government has been doing, which is one of the reasons we wrote this book and why the work of people like Elizabeth de la Vega, David Swanson, and so on are so important, but the people desperately need to know why this is going on, where it's coming from, where we're going, and what this portends. That's why you'll find a comprehensive analysis in our book, not only of what they're doing, but why they're doing it. While we have a majority of people on our side, that support is largely latent. It's latent in part because of apathy and Philistinism among some Americans, but mainly it's due to ignorance. Most people don't know the full truth about what's being done in their name, and the truth about what this regime and the movement it represents are really all about. At no time in this country's history have the political institutions and the mass media been more at odds with the people than they are today. This presents us with both a problem and an opportunity. In order for our adversaries to continue to do what they do, they have to continue to lie and distort, censor, repress, intimidate, torture, and kill. And as they go along and do more terrible things, they have to do all of these things even more. In order for us to prevail, we must tell people the truth and get the truth out there broadly. We must raise the consciousness of the people. Let me end with something that I wrote in our preface. We stand at a crossroads. Will we obey and be good Germans? In the years preceding Hitler's naming to the German chancellorship, many German Jews and others kept telling themselves, it can't possibly get any worse, and it can't possibly go any further, except that it did. The 1933 Reichstag fire, set by Hermann Goering and the Nazis, but blamed on the communists, was the Nazis' excuse to suspend civil liberties and freedom of the press entirely.
Their 9/11.
It was the German equivalent of our 9/11. We must wake up and smell the sulfur. Thank you.